Good morning, Forma.
Good morning.
So glad to be here. I am not a theologian or a researcher or an academic. I'm not even a very good activist. What I am is a storyteller and a practitioner. So today I'm going to tell you a story and share with you a practice that came out of that story, with the hopes that maybe you'll see a glimmer of your own story or inspiration for a new practice. 4 years ago, I was living a life that I didn't want. I was living in a house I didn't want, in a town I didn't want to live in, working in a job I didn't want to have. I was burned out by and burned out with church life to the point that I had quit going altogether. But I had a plan, and the plan was this. I was going to run as fast as I could into a different life. So I convinced my husband that we should put our house up for sale and make an offer on a farm in another town. And I began to live off in that wonderful place known as When We Move. You might know of this place. And when we move, we're going to plant that garden, and the kids will stop fighting, and I will love my husband every day. When we move, I will finally get into a good exercise routine, and I will develop a better prayer life, and I will finally have time to really get to know my neighbors. When we move was my utopia, and I was desperate for it. But then the bottom fell out. Our ancient, precious family dog died. A week later, all our backyard chickens were slaughtered in a midnight raid by vicious owls. And worst of all, or so it seemed at the time, the sale of our house fell through, which meant that the offer on our farm fell through, which meant that When We Move was now just a distant dream. And that dream was the basket I had put all my eggs in. It was the thing that was going to save me. Needless to say, I was a little ticked off. Well, first I was sad, and in typical Southern diva fashion, I took to my bed, and I ugly cried and ate a lot of ice cream and watched Real Housewives. But then I pulled myself together and I got out of bed, and I discovered that I was mad. I was really, really, really mad. I was mad at God and the universe and the buyers and my husband, because it had to be his fault, and the owls, and you name it, I was mad. But as an optimistic Pollyanna sort of person, I don't do good with mad or disappointment. So I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction of anger and disappointment, straight into the land of denial. And I ran so fast and so hard that I broke my foot in 3 places. And that's not a metaphor, I really did. I broke it the week before Halloween, and I re-broke it around Thanksgiving, and I had to stay in an orthopedic boot until the week after New Year's. So there I was, the very person who literally wrote the book on holidays, spending the entire holiday season on the couch in a boot. There was nowhere left to run. I was stuck. I was now really stuck in the life I didn't want, without the When We Move escape hatch. And because of my foot, I couldn't really do much to improve the situation. I was stuck in a house I didn't want, in a town I didn't want, in the life I didn't want. Now, I'm not sure if this is true of Christians all over the world. You'll have to help me out. But in the South, where I live, Christians love platitudes. And we like to plaster them on things just like monograms. One of the most well-loved platitudes that we love to print in cute calligraphy font on pillows and tote bags is the verse Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and plans to give you a hope and a future. Everyone knows this one, right? Does it drive anyone else batty? Drives me incredibly batty. And laying there in a boot with the house sale and the chickens and the dog all dead, I was pretty sure this was not a plan for a hope and a future. And I was actually harmed. When the year of all the awful things happened, this was the verse that was most quoted to me over and over. And I was not taking it well. In fact, I'd gotten to the point where if one more person told me that God had a plan for me in all of this, I was going to lose it all over their Facebook wall. Things were bad. But not wanting to completely give over to cynicism and believing that surely there was more to Jeremiah 29 than one infuriating verse, I did what I do when I cannot take a certain passage or verse being thrown in my face repeatedly with no context. I broke out my Bible, or maybe I broke out BibleGateway.com, and I looked up Jeremiah 29 and I read the whole chapter. Shocking. And here are the verses that I found that preceded our infamous verse 11. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters, and find wives for your sons and daughters, and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in their number there and do not decrease. Also seek peace and prosperity for the land to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name, and I have not sent them, declares the Lord. And a brick fell on my head. Here was the actual plan, written to people who were living in a place they didn't want to be, doing a job they didn't want to do, completely obsessed with when we move. And this is what God said to them. He said, be here, build houses, plant gardens, eat what grows here, get married, have kids, have grandkids, work for the good of this community you cannot stand. If things go well for your community, they will go well for you. And stop listening to everyone who tries to sell you a quick fix. There are no quick fixes. Interestingly enough, I also noticed in these verses, and the verses that followed 11, these verses reminded me a whole lot of the rule of St. Benedict. There within these verses were hints at the vows of stability and conversion and obedience, a call to both a people and a geographical place, the call to remain limber and open to the work of the Holy Spirit, and a call to follow where God leads. Over the months that I sat on my couch, foot in boot, heart in throat, I thought a lot about these words and how they intersected with the teachings of Benedict. And I reckon that I experienced some sort of Holy Spirit conviction. Because when the boot came off, I knew, without a shadow of doubt, what I had to do, what our family was called to do. We had to slow down and dig into the life we had. And I especially had to learn how to be here before I could move there, wherever there was. We had to follow the call of stability, to be present to the people in the geographical location in which we found ourselves. And we had to remain open to the Spirit's moving in our lives right where we were. And we had to be obedient to these calls. We had to learn how to practice what I now call slow living. And we needed to use the framework laid out in Jeremiah 29 to begin. Now, I need to interject that my motives weren't always pure and pretty and unicorny. There was a little bit of, fine God, we'll try it your way. But still, we were committed. Running had not worked for us, so we were going to give staying a shot. For the next year, we were going to practice slow living by embracing the Benedictine vows and following the outline of Jeremiah 29. We began by practicing the first command, build houses. For our situation, this meant fixing all the things that were wrong with our house. Instead of ignoring the ancient roof and the rotting places in the floors and the peeling lead-based paint, we decided to be good stewards of the house we had, fixing all the broken places, instead of squirreling the money away miserly for the someday house. Next, we tackled plant gardens. Over the course of the year, we began to work on a really pitiful yard in earnest. We planted a garden, and I, who don't do yard things, learned how to plant flowers and bulbs and start pole beans from seeds. We adopted more chickens and got a new dog, and we filled our yard with living, growing things, and we feasted on each egg or small bean that we harvested. We stayed married and continued to raise our kids. They were there. We even unofficially fostered another child for a season. We decided to work for the good of our neighborhood, and we decided to begin by joining a local church, one within walking distance of our house, one whose bells we could hear from the driveway reminding us that we were late. We also cooked for a local homeless ministry and allowed them to show us hospitality. We supported small, locally grown businesses whenever we could, trying to put our money back into our own neighborhood. And finally, we stopped believing, and this was probably the hardest part, that there were any quick fixes to the things we were unhappy with. We stopped believing the lie that moving is what would make things better, that the next thing would be the one to fix all our issues. We decided to forsake the next thing for what we had instead. And this is how we came to live under the assumption that our whole life was a seamless liturgy. That everything from the care and maintenance of our home to planting food to eat to supporting local businesses to raising our kids were part of living the Christian life. They were not a separate to-do list from our practices of prayer and giving and service and stewardship and hospitality and formation. They were in fact the very same list. Caring for our home was an act of stewardship. Gardening became a form of prayer. Creating a nurturing home for any kid who entered was the practice of hospitality. Cooking for the homeless neighbors was service. Supporting small businesses was giving. And all of these things, when done with intentionality and reflection, were formative. We had found what Nietzsche said to be true, that the essential thing in heaven and earth is that there should be a long obedience in the same direction. The results being something which has made life worth living. Our intentional obedience to a slower and longer way of approaching our life had led to a life very much worth living. Once we weren't living a life that was consumed with our search for the promised land of the next thing, we found that we had margin to do the work needed on our marriage, our parenting, our finances, right where we were. And we had discovered that our home life was its own sort of liturgy. A rhythm had sprouted of spiritual practices that were integral to our home life and not just incidental. 2 years after I broke my foot, I wonderfully and unexpectedly stumbled into an amazing job opportunity, the one I have now, one that would require a move to a more rural community. So we sold our house, we bought a farm, and we moved to the next thing at long last. I started a new job in a new town, and my kids started a new school, and we found ourselves in a whole new world. And a little over a year in, I can tell you this. We are having to learn how to be here once again. We are learning how to practice slow living all over in a new context. The kids are struggling with, can't we go back? And I have to fight the urge to scream, I can't wait until blankety blankety blank is done, in regards to all the projects a fixer-upper in 8 acres requires. We are once again learning to live a seamless liturgy at home, praying while we paint, practicing stewardship with the table saw, buying our pig food from the local shop, opening our doors to new neighbors who think, vote, and believe very differently from us. I am doing my best to stay open to the Spirit's leading and learning how to say no to some really great things in order to do the things that are best for this season of our life. Building, planting, reaping, raising, connecting, giving. These are the tactile ways we are continuing to practice stability, conversion, and a long, slow obedience in the same direction. These are the ways that we practice the spiritual discipline of living slow in our home. And these things are also the outward signs of the inward graces that we have continued to discover along the way. Graces that we have only found since we stopped running and we started digging into the earth around us, living slowly, one day at a time, right where we are.